We now know, PT, the Flyers will not make the playoffs. Dave Isaac wrote about it. Courier posts online at Dave G. Isaac. Why did the Flyers miss out on the playoffs 1 year, Pete, after scoring 96 points and getting into the playoffs? You would think that
with
they would
essentially the same roster and actually a couple improvements. Yes.
That's right. You would think that they would be taking a step in the next direction. Instead, they seemingly took 2 steps back, Dave Isaac. So what were some of the reasons that this Flyers team will play a meaningless hockey game tonight against the Devils?
How much time do you have? Well, I think part of it was last year making the playoffs was a bit of an overachievement. And this year was a moderate underachievement. I don't even know if it was a significant underachievement, but it was definitely to some level an underachievement. So when you see those two things juxtaposed against one another, it looks a little bit worse than I think it may really be. I mean, even if they had made the playoffs, what are they going to do? Get crushed by the Washington Capitals again in the first round? I mean, would that have made a huge difference? It would have lined the pockets of Comcast a little bit more, the owner of the Flyers. But outside of that, I mean, look, I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture here. This team did take a step backwards. And the biggest reason is inconsistency. There were different things ailing them throughout the season, and they just didn't have the kind of team that was able to overcome any of them. I mean, the start of the year, they got really poor goaltending, but they were scoring goals. So you're filling up both nets. That doesn't do you much good. There were times after that 10-game win streak when they couldn't score, and their goaltending wasn't a ton better, but it was better. So there were several things for this team that kept them out of the playoffs. And the reason why I think that this offseason will be a little bit different is because you're used to seeing the Flyers try and fix holes with money, plug it up with moolah. And the Flyers are at a point now in Ron Hextall's grand plan where some of those holes will be filled in-house with young prospects, and I think that is the first tangible step here. People ask because they missed the playoffs twice in the last 3 years, is the process wrong? But, well, now you're going to start seeing tangible results from the process because the Flyers won't be taking huge chunks off the books in the salary cap because there will be young players coming in. There'll be entry-level contracts instead of deals that rental players usually get.
So, Dave, of the guys, we kind of went over the roster yesterday of the offensive players, and you got Claude Giroux and Voracek and Simmons and Courier and some of the veterans who have been here as the core offensive players. Who are some of those guys that maybe their roles get diminished and can be improved upon? Because that's where you look at the disconnect, it seems like, on this organization is they got a lot of young defenders, but where does the scoring come from, or are they going to count on the same guys to pick up their level next year?
Well, that's where a lot of the underachievement came. I mean, the only guy that I think you can really say played up to expectations this year is certainly Wayne Simmons and maybe Jake Voracek. They probably wanted a little bit more from Jake. But Wayne Simmons, another 30-goal year, you look at his stat line across the last 5 years since he's been a Flyer, and he's been the model of consistency. But everybody else, that hasn't quite been the case. So do they need more out of Claude Giroux next year? You betcha. Do they need more out of Shane Gostisbehere? Absolutely. They expected more from Dale Weiss, certainly, a guy who had his career high in goals last year at 14. He's come on strong as of late, but the first several months of the season, you just didn't see that from Sean Couturier. He'll end up with a decent stat line this year, but I think there needs to be a point in his development where he takes a decent jump and not just baby step and baby step. Braden Shen's been okay, especially on the power play, but they'll be needing more of that. Will they hope for more points from Ivan Provorov, who's been their best defenseman, but more in an all-around role? Yeah, they're going to hope for more offense from him next year. They'll have Travis Sanheim, I would imagine, on their blue line next year. That'll be some of the offense. Like I said the last time I was on with you guys, I think that their Swedish prospect, Oscar Lindblom, will be up here, and they'll hope that he takes some of that offensive responsibility too. Yeah, it'll be mostly in-house.
And won't that be a novel concept, Dave, to have a left winger who's actually a left winger, not like a Jordan Wheel, a converted center that you move over to left wing because you don't have anybody else to play the spot?
Yeah, that really seemed like quite a chore for quite a while, asking guys it became like a prerequisite to be so versatile that the Flyers could just move them all over the lineup. But, in talking to a lot of the players, they don't think that that's as big of a deal because in today's game now, with how quickly it transitions back and forth, you have to be ready to be responsible defensively anywhere in the ice. So it's really more about where they set up offensively. I guess in terms of the position that they play and getting that scoring where they want it to be. But yeah, it would be nice to have somebody be in one position and kind of stay there because regardless of their versatility, I think that it does take out some of their comfort level with them. So I think that would be a good thing, absolutely.
So the playoffs out of the picture now for the Philadelphia Flyers, but some new faces going to join the lineup tonight. And one of them, in fact, going to join the lineup a little earlier than we thought maybe because of his schedule with the Hobie Baker. Tell us about Samuel Moran, who's going to play tonight and wear number 50, and then Mike Vecchione, 74. You got to like that number, 74.
Yeah, keeping the old training camp number. Mike Vecchione is going to be the fourth-line center tonight, and I think when you look at what the Flyers did with that line, and they have Colin McDonald in that role, and he's been a guy who's put a couple points up on the board for them, instead of a guy like Chris Vandevelde, who's a penalty killer, and you put Vecchione, a guy who's obviously scoring the NCAA level, and then put Pierre-Edouard Bellemare on the right. All of a sudden now you've got a line with a little bit of skill instead of just penalty killers, basically, that you're trotting out there and saying, oh, they'll be honest defensively, but then they don't help you a whole lot offensively. So I think that we'll have to see, obviously, what kind of ice time they get and what position Dave Hextall puts them in. But on paper, that line has the skill set to put up a little bit more offensively than the Flyers' fourth line as it stood recently. And as for Sam Moran, he's obviously a big defenseman, a big bruiser, and when you look at the way that the Flyers and Devils games have gone this season, that's something that they're going to need. And with the guys that they're missing out of their lineup, Radko Gudas and Brandon Manning, the physicality is a big thing on both of those guys' resumes. So Sam Moran will be an interesting case. Numbers 1 through 27 in the 2013 draft have all seen NHL action and at least 8 games of NHL action, with the exception of Sam Moran, who's picked number 11. So it's taken a little bit longer than a lot of people hoped, but we'll see if he's close to being ready for this NHL level. And, I'm not sure exactly the extent of Brandon Manning's injury. The Flyers say that he's day-to-day. I would be surprised if we saw Radko Gudas for the rest of the season. So I think, especially because it's just this weekend here, you could be seeing Sam Moran in potentially all 3 of those games before he goes back to the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, and that team's hoping to have a playoff run, and then we'll see what happens next season from there.
Dave Isaac with us, our Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN, and at Dave G. Isaac on Twitter. Are there 2 or 3 names that when you look at the roster as currently constructed, you say, yeah, that guy won't be back, or that guy won't be back? Are there 2 or 3 in your mind that you think are moving on?
I think Michael Delgado is probably one of them. It's interesting when guys get to a certain age and they've played a little bit in the league, they can control their own destiny and they have a bit more of a say. And with the way that Michael Delgado has been used this year, I don't think he's in any type of hurry to come back and play for Dave Hextall the way that he's used him. I mean, he's been the penalty minute, the time on ice minutes eater one night, and then the next night he's a healthy scratch. I don't know how you get from point A to B there, and I don't think the player does either. I think most of the change is going to come defensively. So in terms of offense, I don't even know if they have an expiring contract up front that I would expect not to be back, other than Chris Vandevelde, who, like I said, it's really there in a penalty kill role and doesn't provide much offensively. And if the Flyers have a guy like Vecchione here, that's certainly much more useful of a player to them in that spot and in those minutes. So I think those are probably a couple of the guys. The rest of them are kind of just question marks. A guy like Matt Reed, who it's like, well, he's still got another year left on his contract, and I don't think that the Flyers would buy him out. But you wonder about the expansion draft with him. As we've talked about on the show before, you wonder about both goaltenders, really. Michael Neuvirth, whether there's a deal in place with Vegas there, whether that 2-year contract extension has something to do with the Golden Knights. and Steve Mason, does he want to come back here? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if any of those guys were not here when things start back up again in September for training camp.
Dave Isaac, I was going to say, it wouldn't be a Flyers conversation without talking about the goalie. Is the goalie in the organization that will start opening night next year?
I don't believe so. I really don't. I think that both of those guys, Mason and Neuer, I wouldn't be shocked if both of them were gone next year. I really wouldn't. And Anthony Stolarz, I don't know if he's going to get the keys that quickly to be a starting goaltender in the NHL. I mean, he's played, 5 games now all this season, but that's the extent of his NHL resume. So I think they will end up going outside to find a guy who will start opening night for them. Stolarz might be the backup. I'm not saying that he won't be on the team. The same could be said for his goalie partner down in the AHL, Alex Lyon. Maybe Alex Lyon comes in and wins that job. I don't know. But in terms of who their starter is going to be, I don't think that guy is here yet. I think that they're probably going to try and find somebody who can be a stopgap. And that 2-year contract for Michael Neuvirth made it look like, okay, maybe he's the stopgap, and maybe he still is. Again, I don't have a whole lot to prove my theory here. It's just a theory. It's just a hunch. I think that they need somebody for that period of time that can help them until one of their young guys, one of their prospects, and take the ball from there.
Hey, last one. You were a part of that game the other night. I think I saw you tweet that it was one of the most bizarre games that you had ever covered. Neuvirth, any update on him? You saw Stolarz show up, 5 minutes before the puck dropped, and then a guy who wasn't on the roster that they just signed from the downtown athletic club. They tried to sneak him into the game, and they were denied on that one. So just kind of give us an overview of maybe the most bizarre game you've ever covered.
Yeah, that was really strange. With Neuvirth, the scariest thing there was him just collapsing with nobody around him. Like I've told other people, when there's a huge hit and there's a collision there, you expect something to happen. But there was a face-off in the neutral zone, and all of a sudden the goalie just falls like he's been shot, and you wonder what the hell happened. I mean, it's so quick. There wasn't any contact with him earlier in the game. It was something like we knew pretty quickly that he had been ill, and that you'd hoped that that was part of it, just so that it wasn't anything more serious and more rare. I mean, 7 years ago, the Atlanta Thrashers goalie, Andrei Pavlik, just passed out in the middle of the ice, and they said that it was just a fainting spell. That's what they called it. So it wasn't even linked to an illness. The Flyers say that that's probably not the case here with Neuvirth, who actually was in the other goal on that night during that game, strangely enough. But yeah, it was just a bizarre game with all the circumstances. They signed Eric Szymborski to an amateur tryout just in case Anthony Stolarz wasn't able to get there in time, or if he had run into traffic. And all of a sudden, Szymborski's dressing after all, and he's not even replacing the guy that he thought he would. So it was just a very strange night. So complicated, it became a very difficult story to try and tell, but certainly an exciting one.
Dave Isaac with us here at Dave G. Isaac. Flyers and the Devils tonight playing out the string. No playoff hockey, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe
at the beautiful Prudential Center, where they make the media pay for parking.
Really?
Isn't that terrible?
I never heard of such a thing.
That happens in a few buildings, but yeah, Newark's a far cry from Philly, or even Brooklyn.
All right, Dave. Well, enjoy the last couple of games here, and we'll talk to you in the offseason to see how they put this team back together.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.